You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about positive solutions to environmental challenges. Solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe? How to plant a food forest? Restorative design or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned for Sustainable World Radio. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier. The audio quality of this podcast episode isn't as clear as usual. That's because I was out in the field, in a cornfield. So when my guest speaks, you may hear the wind through the corn or rustling of leaves. Welcome to Sustainable World. My guest today is Zea Mays, also known by his street name, Corn. Welcome, Corn.
Thank you.
And Zea Mays comes from the Poaceae family, and I hope I pronounced that right. They have a long tradition of philanthropy. And Zea, it's so nice to talk with you. I know you've been really busy, and I've tried for a long time to get an interview with you, and I've heard so much about you through the years. And let's just start off. How's your family doing?
We're all doing pretty good. Some of the kids are getting into trouble, but every family will have that. You know, my family and yours go back a long, long way. About 10,000 years. We've built great civilizations together.
That is amazing. 10,000 years. I didn't know that. What do you mean by great civilizations?
Well, you remember the Aztecs? Their ancestors were able to settle down and grow large crops of corn instead of migrating in small bands to follow the natural food supplies like roots and berries. Corn meant more food, more babies, permanent houses, and eventually roads and vast trade networks.
Was it just the Aztecs who relied so heavily on corn?
No. Everybody from Mexico, the cultivation of corn spread across the Americas, even up into what's now Canada, before the Spanish and the Portuguese brought it back to Europe and Africa. Now you guys produce almost 1 billion tons of corn every year. You know, you can have too much of a good thing, even corn.
So you say we've been together, people in corn, for about 10,000 years. That's just incredible. Could you tell us a bit about that long relationship?
At least 10,000 years. My genes have been traced back to wild grasses that grew in the lowlands of Mexico that your ancestors found and domesticated.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea. How did that work?
My first ancestors looked more like my cousin's wheat or rice than me. They had really small kernels. It took several thousand years of selective breeding for us to look even close to what we look now. And the biggest jumps have been in the last 150 years thanks to hybridization. But there's now literally thousands of ways that corn could be used, most of which we're kind of proud of. From the starch in your shirts to the biofuel in your gas tanks, cattle feed to Halloween decorations. You know, almost everything you eat has corn in it, so there's lots of choices. But archaeological evidence suggests my primitive ancestors were popped on the fire like popcorn or soaked in ash water and ground into flour. Corn is a powerful tool, but you have to be careful how you use it. In fact, we're kind of worried that you're becoming too dependent on us again without fully understanding the consequences.
You think corn is a powerful tool? In what way? And what kind of consequences are you talking about? I know that people have had health issues. Are there ecological problems or economic problems? Could you tell our listeners about those?
All of the above. You heard the phrase "putting all your eggs in one basket." Well, that's what's happens with corn these days. But like health issues, corn is cheap and versatile. It's a very, very simple starch. You're eating corn syrup and cornstarch and 1,000 different corn products. Coke or a candy bar, corn syrup. Corn is almost everything you eat, especially if you're poor.
So people that can't afford higher quality food are eating corn, it sounds like, with almost every meal. What about fast food?
A hamburger is 93% corn in the United States. And that's a problem for us and a problem for the cows. Cows were designed by nature to eat grass and woody sort of things. And if they're fed mainly corn before they're slaughtered, so they gain weight and bulk up, just like that cow you ate. Eating processed corn almost exclusively will make you bulk up
Yeah, that does not sound healthy. What about chicken?
Industrial chicken, like Tyson chicken that most of the fast food places use and most of what you can get in the store, is 100% corn.
So when you say industrial chicken is 100% corn, you're talking about that's what they're fed as their main food source.
Their their feed is made of corn. Even fish are fed on corn, like catfish pellets. How can you expect to eat a balanced diet if nothing that you eat ate a balanced diet?
It sounds like corn is very cheap. And we mentioned earlier, or you were mentioning, or I was mentioning about economic problems. Could you talk about that?
By weight, there's more than twice as much corn produced in the world as there is the next biggest crop, which I think is rice. That's what I mean by putting all your eggs in one basket. If corn fails, everything that you make from corn becomes more expensive, from biofuels to food, and people starve. People already were worrying about starving when the biofuels explosion happened a couple of years ago, and it cost more to eat because the corn was being diverted to biofuels. You need to diversify, but instead you're focusing on one crop, corn, and your corn production is getting dangerously focused on just a few varieties.
That's interesting. Never really thought about that. So we're really monocropping a lot. Could you tell us about that?
Monocropping
Um,
is when you look out on a field and there's one type of plant growing there. If you back up a little ways, like you were zooming out of a Google map, and you look around and the fields next to it are that same crop, and you look a little further and those fields are still the same crop. And not just that, they're the same variant of the same crop, genetically identical.
it doesn't sound very food
No, it's
secure.
not. A large part of the success story with corn has been versatility. Your ancestors discovered that some variety of corn would grow well just about anywhere and bred especially to suit the situation, like shorter growing seasons in the mountains or less water in the southwest. There's almost 20,000 distinct genetic varieties of corn. Lately, or in the last 150 years, the most productive strains have been cultivated and everything else has been abandoned for industrial production. Even in the United States, the westward expansion, there were over 1,000 different corn hybrids from 300 different races of corn grown in different bioregions in the United States. But almost all of the varieties grown now come from one ancestor, so the crops are more susceptible to pests. That sets the stage for superbugs that evolve to be especially good at eating that one crop, and there's lots of it for them to eat.
That's sad. And I just have to ask, just an aside, what is it like to be eaten by an insect when you're growing?
Well, um, probably kind of like a bad relationship.
I can see that. And I do want to remind our listeners that my guest today is Zea Mays, also known as Corn, from the Poaceae family. And Zia, it's just an honor to speak with you. The more I learn about you, the more I just respect you, and I'm also very concerned with what you're saying.
Well, we owe it all to you guys. We were just tough to grass 10,000 years ago.
Let's get back to those super bugs you were talking about. So the sheer volume of this same variety of corn being grown gives these insects a super target. Could you tell us about that? And also, what do you mean by you were speaking about hybrids corn? Can you talk about that as well?
In the 1970s, there was a corn blight, and it had just really become a pattern for everybody to be sowing the same types of corn seeds. So when that blight hit, it spread up from the southeast through Illinois and took out about 15% of the corn crop because the blight just kept growing and growing, and if there had been different types of corn grown, then the blight would have been less successful at eating one of them and it would have slowed things down. So that ended up being a superbug, but nothing near what will happen today because all of the corn is even more closely related than it was back then. If you're working toward a monoculture, you're working toward creating an environment where nothing else can live. And even that one thing that you're trying to put there, like corn, can't live there by itself. Like the hybrids that are used almost exclusively for the last 150 years can't be grown from their own seed. They have some fantastic thing about them that we like big ears with big kernels that produce lots of food for ourselves and for yourselves and your animals. But those mutant characteristics come at the price of the plants not being able to make baby plants that are exactly the same anymore. So farmers get the benefit of larger crops, but then they become tied to the financial system where they have to buy corn seed again and again every year.
So they can't save the seed from their crop like they did before.
Not and have it produce what it was reliably. And in fact, they often would have to sign agreements promising not to save their seed because that seed is intellectual property of a company.
Could you tell for people who share, for those who may not know, how does corn propagate? How does that happen in nature? What goes on?
In nature, corn propagates through pollen, and those big tufts of silk, of wavy blonde hair on the top of the corn actually spread the pollen into the wind to fertilize the seeds of other corn plants. And those seeds then have the characteristics of both the mommy and the daddy corn plant. A hybrid is created by closely controlling the laboratory conditions in which plants that created those seeds propagate, so that there's one specific plant pollinating another specific type of plant, and there's no other type of pollen available. That allows humans to create kind of mutant super plants that are very productive or very hearty or have other desirable characteristics. But those characteristics aren't carried through to their offspring.
So it's not, they won't be true to the parent.
Right. The product is more reliable for the farmer. For instance, hybrids have been designed to have a particular height. It's all the same throughout the whole field, so that when the machine comes through and harvests corn, it can uniformly harvest, and the product is an industrial product that's cheaper and more uniform to produce.
Interesting. So they kind of are doing it's selective breeding where they can make it easier for the farmer or more appealing to the consumer.
Right, right, but that can run away from itself. The financial benefits can cause farmers to do things that are good for their bottom line short term, but not good for the earth long term.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the hybrid crops are now have now replaced the original crops, the original 20,000 corn varieties that were planted because they were most suitable for that spot of land. Now the hybrids that are so much more productive are are just used regardless of the fact that they use more water than they need more water than it will happen to rain in that part of Kansas, or regardless of their needing a different soil structure than you'll find in that part of Ohio. And so the compensation for that is that farmers then pump a lot more water out of the earth than the rain will replace, and for instance, draining the Ogallala water aquifer, or add lots of fertilizer to the soil, and that doesn't necessarily put anything back. Like companion planting would would revitalize the soil through its process every year, and this industrial farming of corn is more like strip mining the soil.
It sounds like it's kind of a high maintenance crop as far as like depleting resources.
It's really high maintenance, but the old way of doing it with companion planting and with using the Native Americans would use a fish for fertilizer because that would put a lot of nutrients back into the soil. That's just not done anymore.
Dude, who has time for that? I mean, just there's so many good fertilizers. Just spray some on and be done with it.
What are you
Who,
doing here?
is someone here on the line?
I'm corn, bro. I'm everywhere. But there's no science in your discussion.
You mean like science like Dr. Frankenstein?
Sticks and stones, bro. Sticks and stones.
Is someone here on the line?
You can call me StarLink.
Starling?
Jill, sorry, this is my half brother, BT. You are not StarLink. StarLink is dead.
Brave pioneer killed by cowards. I lived on in his memory.
Hold on, hold on one sec, guys. So, Zia, do you want to continue this conversation with BT?
I guess.
Okay, so BT, welcome to Sustainable World Radio. It's interesting to meet you. So, can you tell our listeners who are you? Who is Starlink, or who are you claiming to be?
Well, this is Zea. StarLink was a genetically modified corn, or GMO, like BT, like my brother here. It was approved for use in animal food in the late 1990s, but not in human food due to worries about possible extreme allergies to the synthetic protein. StarLink retired
He was brutally murdered.
when it was found in human food, and nobody was hurt.
Except StarLink.
With GMOs, there's always a chance that something will go wrong.
Okay, so guys, tell us a bit about genetically modified food. What does that mean exactly?
Genetic modification is a technology that breaks the genetic structure of a plant or animal to insert genes from another organism to get a new organism, a third organism that's supposedly better. BT here, he's got an extra gene from a soil bacteria that's toxic to certain bugs. But there's so many potential problems with this technology that over 50 countries have banned it.
Luddite fascist dudes. They have no proof there's any danger.
They have no proof there isn't any danger. That's like saying Russian roulette is okay because you looked in one of the gun chambers and it was empty.
Okay, so this conversation's taking an interesting turn. I think this is going to be great. So, in case our listeners are getting a little confused, I'm talking right now with Zea Mays or Corn, our friend of, was it 20,000 years or 10,000? A long time.
Years.
How long was it?
10,000 years.
Of 10,000 years, and his half brother BT. And BT is a genetically GMO or genetically modified organism. So, Zia, since we started with you, and I can kind of understand you better, what sorts of dangers are we talking about with GMOs? Are you referring to more allergic reactions like with the StarLink corn and or something worse?
Where to start?
We'll start with the super pest non-issue.
It's a big issue. A major concern with pest-resistant GMOs is that the pests they don't kill will be bred to be more resistant, and already that's happening.
Precautions are being taken.
Precautions are supposed to be taken, but 25% of the GMO growers in the U.S. are not taking the precautions required by law, and with 85% of the United States crop being GMO, that's just corn. That's a lot of incubation space for pesticide-resistant pests that are already showing up.
So, Zia, you just said 85% of the US corn crop is GMO?
At least, yes.
And you were referring earlier to how much of that corn is in our food and food we wouldn't even think that corn was in. So that sounds like a rather large experiment to me.
Proteins that corn varieties in people's diets, the specific proteins uh, from genetically modified corn varieties are already showing up in significant doses in the blood of unborn babies and women, pregnant women. The markers are there. It's pretty scary.
It is really scary. And sorry to interrupt you guys. So you were talking about the pesticide resistant pests are already showing up that are resistant to um, this toxin, what extra gene from soil bacteria. Could you talk a bit about that? And BT, what do you have to say to that?
Chemical use is way down thanks to these genes that let us not be eaten by these nasty bugs. Like you didn't want to be eaten by a worm either, Zia.
Chemical use is not down. Pesticide use was down, but thanks to the resistant pests, it's going back up. Other chemicals like Roundup are up 752%, like just between 1997 and 2003, because of herbicide-resistant GMO crops.
I'm shocked because Roundup now, a lot of information has been coming out about how Roundup is much more environmentally persistent than originally believed, and the horrific effect it's having on amphibians and other animals, including possibly humans. So,
It saves farmers millions of dollars every year not having to till their weed.
well, 752% up.
Um, Monsanto's making a lot of money this way by killing everything. Roundup ready GMO fields are planted and they're sprayed with weed killer to kill everything else. That runs down into the streams and rivers and makes a soup. It just gets more toxic over time to every other form of life. Okay, farmers make a few more bucks. Monsanto makes millions more, but it's not working.
That's really disturbing. So basically, this field will be sprayed with Roundup because the corn is resistant to the Roundup.
Yields are up, man, and we got a hungry world to feed.
Yields really on crops in general over the last 20 years are up quite a bit thanks to improved soil care and harvesting. But GMO crops are no more productive than normal crops. What little is left of those normal crops, even though so much poisoning is happening to keep those GMO crops going, because everything around them has to be poisoned in order for them to live, because they're so not what nature intended.
Oh my gosh. And I heard too that herbicide resistant weeds are now running rampant across the Midwest. Is that true, Zia?
Yeah. In Illinois, they've identified weeds that are resistant not just to Roundup, but to three other even more toxic herbicides. So farmers are having to spray their fields with poison and grow their crops and then go back in and weed and till, which was why they put in the poison and the GMOs that they paid a lot of money for in the first place.
BT, I do have to say it's not sounding great.
Well, there's been setbacks, man, but you know,
BT, there's been catastrophes, and there's more to come. GMO corn is now being linked to organ failure in test animals and livestock. How do you think that makes me feel as corn to be linked to organ failure in the animals we're supposed to feed and the people we're supposed to feed? Animals and people were not designed to eat this stuff. But 86% of corn now, 95% of sugar beets, and most of the soybeans in the US are now GMOs, even though they're not required to be labeled.
BT, I just don't see. I mean, BT, are you against labeling of GMOs?
like it matters, dude. A tomato, tomato. You know.
It might not matter soon. Pollen from GMO corn spreads on the wind like all pollen does, and you know what? It pollinates normal crops. And then the normal crops have new modified genetic structures in ways that people weren't even thinking about at Monsanto and Dow and these other places.
That's You're not nice.
BT, what's so funny?
It's like, Luke, I'm your father, and you're like, no, and I'm like, come with me and we'll rule the galaxies, corn and corn.
You are so stoned on Roundup you can't see that all these natural systems are connected. And instead of fitting into the natural system, these GMO supercorns and super alfalfas and super soybeans are existing at the cost of these natural systems. Look, Jill, humans and corn have a long history, but too much reliance on corn, especially the GMOs, really could ruin everything.
BT, you sound really irresponsible.
I, I am what I was made. come come to the dark side, yeah.
Zia, are you there?
Yes.
Zia, how does it feel? You're really disappearing.
Well, I I I don't see where there's a future for me. There's been so much joy and life in cornfields. People used to play baseball in us, and kids used to run and hide in us, and the crows would circle overhead, and now we're like a toxic zone where nothing else can live, and that that that's just sad.
Well, it kind of is just the opposite of what you've been traditionally, historically honored as a giver of life. And that must be very disturbing.
Yeah, so much for the Aztec corn god. It's more like well, I guess they had human sacrifice, so.
Is there anything that people can do that are listening right now to help you?
Well, insist on labeling. There's a lot of money for some companies in obscuring where your food comes from and what makes it. If you start with just knowing what you're eating, insist on knowing what you're eating, and then educate yourself. Monsanto keeps trotting out studies that claim that the other studies that claim that there was organ failure are untrue. Then those studies are challenged, and everybody has a horse in this race. Follow the dollars and see where it goes. Educate yourself, and then grow a garden or something. Walmart now sells sweet corn that has been genetically modified, and it's not labeled. So if you want to know what you eat, you pretty much just have to grow a garden anymore. If you live in an area where you can have a relationship with the farmer who grows your food, do that. Support that farmer. Buy that farmer's food, and go to farmers markets where you can tell that farmer how you feel about what you're eating, and what you hope to be eating, and assure that farmer that you'd be willing to pay a little bit more if necessary to buy something that you know is good for you. Help make their lives and their livelihoods secure some other way than by making their deal with the devil that they have to do.
You know,
Um,
Zia, it's such an honor to talk with you today, and I'm so glad you could take time out of your schedule. It kind of sounds like you're on the run a bit. Do you, we're kind of out of time now, but if you could say one thing to our listeners, both Zia and BT or GMO, we should call you by your real name. Do you have any last words that you'd want to say to them?
Dude, I'm gonna have lots of last words because you're gonna be eating me for a long time.
And Zia?
I hope that people come to your senses. I hope that you think about our long relationship and try to find out what we can do to continue to have a long relationship, and take care of the earth, take care of the soil. Don't make crazy Frankenstein monsters like my brother.
That was very moving. Thank you so much, Zea Mays of the POACE family, for joining us today on Sustainable World. And genetically modified corn, thank you too for joining us. It was very interesting to get your perspective on this.
Later, dude.
And thanks, Zia, and hang in there, and we'll do everything we can to spread the word to help you survive, continue on to survive for another 10,000 years in service and in symbiotic relationship with humanity.
Thank you.
Both Zea Mays and genetically modified corn were played by Chris McClellan. Chris McClellan is a writer, photographer, and natural builder who's raising free-range organic children in Northeast Ohio. Chris McClellan teaches natural building and sustainable living, and he says he does so mostly as an excuse to play in the mud. If you want to learn more about Chris's work in natural building, visit his website, unclemud.com. You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. You can find us online at sustainableworldradio.com and also on iTunes. For more information about permaculture and ecology, visit the Sustainable World Media YouTube channel, where you'll find videos about permaculture, aquaponics, organic gardening, rainwater harvesting, and much, much more. Sustainable World Radio is a listener-supported program. If you like what we do, please consider making a donation to the show. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier, and thank you so much for listening.